Good morning, friends. Welcome to Rising. I am Krystal Ball.
And I am Saagar Enjeti.
Lots and lots of stuff going on. We've got more movement in the markets with the Chinese non-trade deal. We've got AOC taken after Joe Biden and some interesting moves on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, we're taking a look at all of that. So it's coming up today on Rising. Good morning, everybody. So we have a lot going on today, Krystal.
Indeed.
Tell us what's on your radar for climate change.
So what is on my radar this morning is no middle ground. So a couple of Biden aides talked to Reuters and told them that Biden was developing his climate policy, and it was going to seek to be a middle ground that relied heavily on sort of rolling back the Trump-era anti-environmental policies, going back to the Obama era, and continuing to rely a lot on fossil fuels. Well, this was not the right thing to say, and progressives, to put it mildly, were quite pissed. You already had Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who of course is now a very important voice on the left, calling that a, quote, deal breaker. And last night at an event in support of the Green New Deal put on by the Sunrise Movement, she went even further. Let's take a listen.
Be damned if the same politicians who refused to act then are going to try to come back today and say we need a middle of the road approach to save our lives. That is too much for me. We cannot, and we will not accept anything less than a solution to save ourselves, and that's exactly what this is.
So the reality in the Democratic primary is that focusing on climate change is not some uber, hyper, left, liberal, crazy thing. In fact, a lot of polling has climate as the top issue, or at least rivaling healthcare up at the top 2 or 3 issues in poll after poll. So my question is this kind of the first big Biden misstep? And Saagar, it really puts him out of step with where the energy in the party is, and definitely where with young people in the party are. I mean, the Sunrise Movement has taken off at college campuses across the country, and this is the first area where he really has stepped on something that is very much at odds with where the progressive base and the majority of the party is at this point in time.
Well, I'm not so sure about that. I'm very curious to see how this will actually affect him in the states that he actually needs to win in order to become president of the United States. The Sunrise Movement and the Green New Deal and a lot of these policies may be, great campaign fodder in San Francisco or in Los Angeles and to the California activist base. Does it translate to Pennsylvania? Does it translate to Michigan, Wisconsin? These are not necessarily places or voters who are concerned with this issue. So his middle of the road policy may be the best electorally, but it's going to get him in trouble with the Twitter audience.
But I actually think that the thinking on the Green New Deal is totally backwards, because what separates the Green New Deal from previous very unpopular climate change proposals from the Democratic side is that it pairs climate change action with a jobs guarantee. It explicitly includes making sure that people in West Virginia and Michigan and Pennsylvania and other places that are fossil fuel industry reliant aren't left behind. And that's what actually makes, so far, and I think I agree it's early, this is still being defined in the people's minds, Green New Deal is actually really popular, not just with Democrats. It's popular across the country. It's popular in those states that Biden needs to win. So I don't know. I think this is the first place where you really see how he is from a different era, how his ideas are all about going backwards rather than sort of embracing the new movement in the party. And ultimately, look, he's still the front runner. I think you'd still put your money on Biden being the nominee, but this shows how he could be potentially brought down.
I think that absolutely, that is right. And that is the central critique of Biden in the first place, which is, does anybody really want to go back to 2012?
Yeah.
So many people, a lot of people do, in terms of demeanor, in terms of the character of our politics and all of that. But that is largely just the top percentage of the population in age. What does the rest of the country want?
Right.
Is that something that you're ready to represent? I don't know if that's the answer is yes yet.
Yeah. By the way, there's a new Emerson poll out that shows the current state of the race. Yet again, it's Biden and Bernie at the top. And I think, you've got this kind of group of 5 folks who are battling out for the top positions. But in poll after poll after poll, it has been Biden and Bernie. I mean, this really is a two-man race at this point. Now, anything could change. The debates could shuffle things around. But literally every poll since they've started polling, it has been these two guys at the top.
It's consolidated basis of support. Bernie Sanders is a huge campaign apparatus from his previous run. Joe Biden has the consensus of the liberal establishment, the trust of many of the voters who just want to go back to the Obama era, especially the older voters. And so for that, it really does go to show you that I'm not sure so much if the debates are going to change all that much going in, because so many people have just made up their mind.
I agree. These two guys are popular. People aren't really looking for alternatives. And I have to say, it's a worthy debate. Like, they are two very distinct visions. They are two very distinct approaches to political change. And it's a worthwhile debate to have. So I'm excited to see it unfold, Saagar.
Me too.
What are you looking at, sir?
Well, what's on my radar is that Justice Brett Kavanaugh made a very interesting decision yesterday and crossed the aisle to side with liberal justices, allowing a case to go forward against Apple. Now, Apple is facing a grave threat with this lawsuit. What the crux of it is that developers on the Apple iPhone program are suing Apple, arguing that it is a monopoly and that Apple's ability to charge developers and to control the apps that are on its platform can constitute monopolistic practices. Apple, of course, says that it's ridiculous, that anybody can sign up for the developer program. But it goes to a central question of who owns your phone. When you buy your phone, shouldn't you have control over your phone, over what people can put on your phone? Is it Apple's decision to serve as a gatekeeper in order to make sure that different apps and use its policies and user protection agreements, etc., in order to decide what you get to put on your device that you spend upwards of $1,000 on? It goes to a broader movement of what's happening here, and it's taking back our power. After you spend, the consumer, over $1,000 on this device, we spend so much money per month going towards this device that is central to our lives, and then to allow people to control and to use their practices, none of which you get to review, all of which are highly legalistic, and then charge money to those who are developers, to a central part of our economy. It goes to a broader question, Krystal, I think, of what we're all talking about here. And that's why I think it's very interesting that Kavanaugh signed on to this, and Justice Gorsuch actually blasted
the other way. It
goes to a broader new conservative politics of looking forward at this power. Now, anybody who falls on the right now is deeply skeptical of Silicon Valley liberals deciding what can and cannot be placed on your phone. Where does this go? What type of electioneering can be used in terms of these practices? Is any of that an this is almost like an in-kind donation. If they want to use it that way.
Right. Well, you have conservatives who are concerned about that it's liberals. I would question that they're really liberals. There's a lot of, signaling, virtue signaling going on there. Let's say neoliberal. And then you have a lot of Democrats very concerned about just monopolization in general and the power that these gigantic companies have over our lives. I mean, just one thing in particular that pisses me off a lot that Apple has done is they have quashed any apps that have popped up to try to allow people to limit their screen time and manage their screen time. They have quashed those because obviously that's not good for their bottom line. And not only as a consumer, but as a parent, right? That speaks to what you're talking about. These stupid things are the center of our freaking lives, and we don't even have control over them. Apple does. So, yeah, it's exciting to see that this is moving forward. It's very interesting to see Kavanaugh sort of finding his own way. I mean, we'll see, right, if he continues to go in a little bit of a different direction or if he goes back to side more with the conservative justices on sort of everything as he gets more comfortable on the bench. But very interesting development there. And then there's another interesting development. In a sort of obscure ruling, the conservative justices sided together to overturn what was essentially a 40-year precedent. And they did it for no other reason. There wasn't like a pressing reason to do it other than that they didn't like the precedent. And Justice Breyer, writing in the dissent, expressed a lot of concern over that move and also wondered where exactly that was going to lead us. He says overruling a case always requires special justification. What could that justification be in this case? The majority does not find one. He also quotes from a very prominent Planned Parenthood versus Casey decision that had to do with abortion. So a lot of liberals are feeling like this is laying the path, laying the groundwork to outright overturn the now longstanding precedent of Roe versus Wade.
So I understand why the justice would point towards this. I understand why liberals would look at that. But it actually, I think, misses the broader aim of much of the conservative legal movement. Most of them are concerned with exactly this type of precedent, which was removed, which is it's administrative law. Mm-hmm. That's what they're obsessed with. They're much more obsessed with the destruction of the administrative state and changing administrative law, which they think governs businesses and regulations, than a lot of them are about Roe versus Wade, to the chagrin of a lot of evangelical Republicans, a lot of social conservatives. This is one of the reasons, I don't know if many you might remember, Josh Hawley was opposing, or not opposing, but he was holding up the nomination and asking questions about Naomi Rao, who comes to the George Mason School of Law, who are much more concerned about libertarian philosophy like this than they are about social conservatism and Roe versus Wade.
It's basically they may go out of their way to ditch precedent that allows them essentially to dismantle the administrative state than they are to go out of their way to dismantle precedent around social rights.
The 5 conservative justices are united on the administrative state and its need to go. But what they're not united on, or at least from what we know, is Roe versus Wade. There's a lot of skepticism in the social conservative community that Justice Roberts would ever join on to such a decision.
So Roberts is the one that they're the biggest.
Roberts is the one they're concerned about.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Always interesting to get a window into your side over there. Next on Rising. Award-winning journalist Jim Risen described the last 2 years as a, quote, slow-motion Saturday night massacre on the American people.
And Risen warns that it's far from over. He expands on that with us when Rising continues.